Before ovens, before recipes were written down, before cookbooks lined shelves, there was fire, and there were hands, hands that knew the land, hands that bore the weight of labor, hands that shaped survival into sustenance. In the mid-19th century, across the plantations of the American South, corn was more than a crop. It was life. It was what remained when everything else was taken. Wheat was for the wealthy, meat was for the masters, but corn was for the people. It was the last ingredient left when the pantry was bare. It was the first ingredient used when hope was still alive. Enslaved men and women, denied even the simplest tools of the kitchen, created something extraordinary. They took cornmeal, added a pinch of salt, mixed in water just enough to form a dough. No bowls, no spoons, no pans, just instinct, just memory, just faith. They shaped the dough with their hands, hands that had picked cotton, harvested tobacco, and carried burdens no one should bear. Then, they placed it directly into the hot ashes of the fire. No barrier, no protection, just flame and earth. And they waited for the scent of smoke and corn to rise, waited for the moment when the bread would harden, crack slightly, and become something more than food. They called it ash cake, a name as simple as the recipe. But behind that name was a story of survival, of creativity, of quiet rebellion, because this bread wasn't just nourishment, it was a declaration, a whisper in the dark. We are still here. Ash cake was made from what was left, but what was left was enough. Enough to feed a body, enough to feed a soul. It didn't need yeast, it didn't need sugar, it didn't need approval, it needed fire, it needed courage. It needed someone who believed that even in the ashes, something good could rise. This bread was born in silence, but it spoke volumes. It spoke of mothers who fed their children with trembling hands, of fathers who carried it in cloth bundles as they worked from dawn to dusk, of communities who gathered around fires, sharing stories, songs, and sustenance. Ash cake was not written into cookbooks. It was passed down through memory, through gesture, through love. It was the bread of the enslaved, the bread of the forgotten, the bread of the resilient. And though it came from the ashes, it never tasted like defeat. It tasted like dignity. It tasted like defiance. It tasted like home. Today, when we speak of ash cake, we're not just talking about a recipe. We're talking about a legacy forged in fire, a legacy shaped by hands that refused to give up. This is the beginning of our journey, a journey into the foods that history tried to forget, but memory refused to abandon. This is ash cake, the bread of fire and faith, the bread that rose from the ashes and carried a people forward. Every ash cake was more than a meal. It was a quiet miracle. In a world built on chains and silence, this bread was a whisper of resistance. It didn't rise in a pan. It didn't wait for yeast. It didn't ask permission. It was made with nothing, and yet it became everything. No tools, no kitchen, no comfort, just fire. Just instinct, just faith. They said the best cooks could hear the fire. They didn't need timers or thermometers. They listened to the crackle of the embers, watched the color of the smoke, felt the heat in their bones. Ash cake was a bread of intuition, of ancestral memory, of survival passed down through generations. It was the kind of food that didn't just fill the stomach, it fortified the spirit. For the enslaved, it was a victory, a small, sacred act of creation in a world designed to erase them. To make something, anything with their own hands was to reclaim a piece of their humanity. And this bread endured. Long after the fields were silent, long after the chains were broken, ash cake remained. It traveled west with pioneers, tucked into cloth sacks, carried in wagons that creaked across the plains. It fed families who had nothing but the horizon. It sustained travelers who had only hope and grit. Ash cake became the taste of the road, dry, firm, enduring. Like the people who made it, like the people who carried it, like the people who refused to let it be forgotten. It was the bread of the enslaved, the bread of the poor, the bread of the wanderer. And in every bite there was a story of someone who kept going, of someone who made do, of someone who believed that even ashes could nourish. Ash cake was never glamorous. It was never celebrated in grand kitchens. It was never plated with garnish or praised by critics. But it was sacred, because it represented something deeper than flavor. It represented resilience. It represented resourcefulness. It represented the quiet power of those who endure. This bread was a symbol of what it means to survive, of what it means to create in the face of destruction, of what it means to say, I am still here. And today, when we speak of ash cake, we speak of more than food. We speak of memory. We speak of legacy. We speak of the fire that never went out. The recipe is simple, but don't let that simplicity fool you, because within these few ingredients lies a story of survival, of spirit, of sacred tradition. Ash cake isn't about precision, it's about presence. It's about listening, not just to the fire, but to the memory of those who came before. Let's begin. You'll need 1 cup of cornmeal, coarse, golden, humble, a pinch of salt, just enough to remind you of the earth, water not measured, but felt. Add it slowly, stirring with your hands, until the mixture holds together. No eggs, no milk, no sugar, no oil. This is not a cake of indulgence. It is a cake of necessity, a bread born from the bare minimum, and yet it becomes something deeply nourishing. Once the dough is formed, shape it into a patty, not too thick, not too thin, just enough to hold its own in the fire. Now comes the part that feels like a ritual. You don't place it on a pan, you don't wrap it in foil. You place it directly into the ashes. Yes, into the fire, into the glowing embers, into the heart of the flame. This is where the magic happens, where the past meets the present, where the ingredients transform. As the ash cake cooks, the scent begins to rise. It's not just the smell of corn, it's the smell of smoke, of soil, of memory. It's the aroma of something ancient, something sacred. You wait, not with impatience, but with reverence. You listen to the fire. You watch the edges of the cake begin to darken. You feel the heat on your face, the warmth on your hands. And then, when the time feels right, you reach in. You lift the cake from the ashes. You brush off the soot, gently, like dusting off an old photograph. And there it is, golden, cracked, perfect in its imperfection. You break it open. Steam rises. The inside is soft, warm, earthy. The outside is crisp, kissed by fire. You take a bite, and in that bite, you taste more than cornmeal. You taste history. You taste hardship. You taste hope. This is not just food. It's a connection. To those who came before. To those who made something from nothing. To those who turned ashes into nourishment. And here's the truth. Anyone can make ash cake. But to truly understand it, you have to feel it. You have to feel the weight of the past in your hands. You have to feel the gratitude for every grain. You have to feel the fire, not just on your skin, but in your soul. Because this bread is not about perfection. It's about presence. It's about remembering. It's about honoring. So the next time you make it, don't rush, don't measure, don't overthink, just mix, shape, place it in the fire, and wait. Wait for the scent. Wait for the story. Wait for the moment when you realize you're not just cooking, you're remembering, you're keeping something alive. Ash cake is more than a recipe. It's a ritual, a return, a resurrection. And when you taste it, you're not just tasting food, you're tasting resilience, you're tasting dignity, you're tasting the fire that never went out. Ash cake is not just a food, it's a mirror that reflects the soul of a people and the spirit of a nation. It's easy to look at it and see only simplicity, cornmeal, salt, water, fire, but look closer, taste deeper, and you'll find something far more profound. This bread is a monument, not made of stone or bronze, but of memory, of resilience, of the quiet, unshakable will to survive. Each grain of corn tells a story of hands that worked the land but never owned it, of backs bent under the sun, of voices silenced but never broken. Ash cake is the edible echo of those voices. It speaks of mothers who fed their children with what little they had, of fathers who rose before dawn, carrying this bread in cloth bundles, walking miles to labor for someone else's wealth. It speaks of grandmothers who passed down the recipe not with words, but with gestures, a handful of this, a splash of that, a knowing nod toward the fire. It speaks of communities that gathered around open flames, sharing stories, songs, and sustenance. It speaks of faith, not the kind found in books, but the kind forged in fire. Because when the world said, "You have nothing," they answered, "We will make something, and it will be good." Ash cake is a symbol of that defiance, of that creativity, of that sacred refusal to disappear. It reminds us that history is not just what's written in textbooks. It's what's cooked in kitchens. It's what's whispered in recipes. It's what's remembered in flavor. This bread is not just a relic, it's a revelation. It tells us that the foundation of America was not built solely by the powerful, but by the hands of the overlooked, the hands that stirred cornmeal in the dark, the hands that fed generations with fire and grit. Ash cake is a reminder that the American story is not one story but many, woven together, layered like sediment, bound by struggle, lifted by hope. And in today's world, a world of abundance and waste, of fast food and forgotten roots, ash cake calls us back to the basics, back to the fire, back to the truth that nourishment is not just about calories, it's about connection. When you make ash cake today, you're not just recreating a recipe, you're honoring a legacy. You're saying, I see you, I remember you, I carry you forward. You're acknowledging that the story of America is incomplete without the voices of those who made bread from ashes. And maybe that's the most American thing of all. Not the grandeur, not the excess, but the courage to begin again with what you have. Ash cake is not about nostalgia. It's about truth. It's about honoring the past while feeding the present. It's about recognizing that the most powerful stories are often the ones baked in silence. So let this bread remind us that dignity doesn't come from what we own, but from what we create. That history isn't just what we inherit, it's what we choose to remember. And that sometimes the most sacred things are the ones made with the least. Ash cake is not just a food, it's a flame. And as long as we keep telling its story, that flame will never die. Maybe you've never tasted an ash cake. Maybe you've never placed dough into fire, never brushed off the ashes, never felt the warmth of history in your hands. But maybe you've lived an ash cake moment, a time when you had almost nothing, but still made something. A time when you had to stretch what little you had, not just to survive, but to preserve your dignity. Ash cake is more than food. It's a metaphor, it's a memory, it's a mirror. It reminds us of the moments we don't talk about, the quiet victories, the small triumphs, the days we made it through with grit and grace. Maybe you've felt that. Maybe you've fed your family with scraps and strength. Maybe you've created beauty from scarcity. Maybe you've turned ashes into nourishment. If this story touched you, if it stirred something deep inside, don't let it end here. Share this video, not for views, not for likes, but for legacy. Because every view is a spark, every share is a flame, every comment is a thread in the tapestry of memory. We're not just telling stories, we're keeping them alive. And we want to hear yours. Tell us in the comments what old recipe still lives in your family. What dish carries the weight of memory? What food reminds you of resilience, of love, of home? Your story matters, your recipe matters, your memory matters. And it might just be featured in the next episode of Forgotten Foods Fridays. Because this isn't just a show, it's a movement to honor the foods that history tried to forget, but our hearts refused to abandon. So take a moment, reflect, remember, and write. Write the name of that dish. Write the story behind it. Write the feeling it gives you. Because when we share these stories, we're not just preserving recipes, we're preserving people. We're preserving cultures. We're preserving truths. Ash cake is just one chapter, but there are thousands more waiting to be told, waiting to be remembered, waiting to be honored. So let's do it together. Let's build a library of memory, one recipe at a time, one story at a time, one voice at a time. This is your invitation to connect, to contribute, to keep the fire burning. Because as long as we remember, as long as we speak, as long as we share, the flame of history will never go out. Maybe the strength of ash cake was never in the cornmeal. Maybe it wasn't in the salt, or the water, or even the fire. Maybe the true power of this bread was in the hands that shaped it, in the hearts that refused to give up, in the souls that believed, even in the darkest times, that something good could still rise. Ash cake is not just a food, it's a flame, a quiet, steady flame that refuses to die. It burned in the fields of the South, it burned in the wagons of the West, it burned in the kitchens of the forgotten, and it burns still in every story we tell, in every recipe we remember, in every act of creation born from scarcity. This bread is a reminder that history is not just grand events and famous names, it's the small things, the quiet things, the things made in silence, but remembered with reverence. Ash cake teaches us that dignity can be baked, that courage can be stirred, that hope can be shaped by hand. It teaches us that even when the world gives you ashes, you can still make bread. And that lesson, that sacred truth, is what makes this bread unforgettable. So as we close this episode, we invite you to carry this story with you, not just in your mind, but in your kitchen, in your conversations, in your heart. Make the bread, share the story, Pass it on, because every time someone remembers, every time someone says, "I know what ash cake is," the fire burns a little brighter. And that fire, the fire of memory, the fire of resilience, the fire of faith, is what keeps history alive. This was another episode of Forgotten Foods Fridays, where every recipe is a remembrance, and every remembrance is a thread in the fabric of America. We honor the hands that shaped this bread. We honor the voices that carried its story. We honor the fire that never went out. The America we remember, keeping history alive. A production from the channel, Memories of Ancient America. Until the next episode, keep the fire burning, keep the stories alive, and never forget, sometimes, the most powerful things are the ones made from ashes.